Hello class. Today we are going to discuss the Crucible, and we will be focusing on the historical aspects of the play, specifically McCarthyism and its influence on the play. I feel like most students only focus on the play specifically, and I want you guys to really understand why the play was written. And I expect by the end that you all will have a good understanding of McCarthyism and its connections to the Crucible. So starting off, we have this question of what is McCarthyism specifically? And to start off, we need to focus on Joseph McCarthy, which is where McCarthyism comes from. And Joseph McCarthy was a Republican from Wisconsin, and in 1950 he feared that he would not be reelected. And so out of this fear, he created this political strategy. And during this time, the Cold War was occurring and the Red Scare became a thing. And so he started targeting communist subversives. And he claimed to possess a list of 205 people in the U.S. State Department who were members of the American Communist Party. And from this, he was the chairman of the Government Committee on Operations of the Senate, which investigated these accused members of the U.S. State Department. And he ended up losing his position in 1954, and he died in 1957, just 4 years after the opening of the Crucible, which means that 1 year after Arthur Miller released this play and it was first performed, he lost his position because it drew so much attention to what McCarthy was doing. So, we mentioned the Red Scare. The Red Scare goes along with the Cold War, which was around the 1950s, and the U.S. just feared that anyone who had any affiliation with the Communist Party was a threat to national security. And McCarthy decided to use this fear to his advantage because he knew that if he could target these other people who would potentially run against him, then people would see him as this type of hero and he would be able to stay in his position because there would be no threat to his position. So then, we have McCarthyism, which rose out of this strategy that he used because of the Red Scare. And a lot of people like to call McCarthyism an anti-communist witch hunt. And basically what McCarthy would do is he would persecute alleged subversives, which were people who he believed to be a part of the Communist Party. And anyone deemed suspicious was questioned about their political activities and the activities of other suspects, and they were expected, if they were brought in for investigation, to just give the names of other people. And if they didn't give the names of other people, or they refused to answer any questions, then they were arrested and sent to jail, and they were automatically assumed as being a part of the Communist Party. And since people were so afraid of communists during this time in America, these people who were accused were blacklisted, and it was impossible for them to find jobs. So then we have this fun fact of how did McCarthy actually come up with his catalog of communists, which consisted of like 250 people on the U.S. State Department. He actually went around Congress and he asked everyone if he could borrow a pen. And the ones who said yes were the ones that he put on the list. And from this list sprung the entire movement of McCarthyism. And during this time, Arthur Miller was actually writing, and he was writing reviews for communist plays, and he greatly despised McCarthy's investigations. And so he wrote The Crucible quickly following this outcry from McCarthy, and he wrote The Crucible, and it was just a reaction to the political climate at the time. And this play was actually a reaction to one of his close friends, because that friend made the decision to go stand in front of McCarthy in his department after she had been accused, and she actually lied and gave the names of her friends and Arthur's friends, and they ended up being brought in for questioning. And so Arthur Miller wrote this play because he was so angry at his friend because of what McCarthyism had done to her. And so in the play, it focuses specifically on the Salem witch trials. And the Salem witch trials in 1692, sorry about that, a group of young girls in Salem claimed to be possessed by the devil, and they accused several local women of witchcraft. And from this, hysteria just spread because in Salem at this time with the Puritans, they were terrified of the devil. They believed the devil lived in the woods, and they were very religious, and to believe that the devil was living in Salem was just a terrible thing. And so people were terrified, and the convicted witches, or the accused people of being witches, were hung or they were burned at the stake, and approximately 150 men, women, and children were accused over the following months. And to save themselves, several accused people confessed, and they ended up lying and giving the name of others just because they were terrified that they were going to be killed. So from this, just going through this, I'm sure you can already see some very obvious connections between the Crucible and McCarthy. And basically what the two have most in common is just collective insanity. And when McCarthy started his campaign, he knew that he had this deep desire to stay in power, and he knew that the only way to do that was to spark fear in other people. And so he created this campaign to attack communists. And similarly, in the play, Abigail Williams has this deep desire to be with John Proctor, and so she knows the only way she can be with him is to just get rid of all of her competition, including his wife and every other woman in Salem. And so she creates this fear among all of them that the devil is living in these women, and she just starts accusing people, and this is her type of campaign. So we see that Abigail Williams actually represents McCarthy in real life, and obviously the witches represent the communists in real life. And Arthur Miller actually wrote himself into the play as John Proctor because he knew he needed somebody to base his entire storyline on. And about the same time that all of this was occurring, he had actually had an affair on his wife with Marilyn Monroe. And so he decided to write himself into the play as John Proctor, who had an affair on his wife with Abigail Williams. And from this, we see a very obvious connection between the Crucible and McCarthyism, and how the two are intertwined, and how McCarthyism is actually the basic foundation of the Crucible.